Lan had never known a world beyond the walls of Hive Alpha. From the moment he was born, his life had been defined by the ever-present hum of machines and the choking fog of industrial fumes that permeated the air. The world of Vashtar III, the Hive world where he lived, was a place of endless toil, where humanity's existence was nothing more than a cog in an unforgiving machine. In Hive Alpha, there was no room for dreams, no room for hope. There was only labor. The Hive was a massive, sprawling city, its towers reaching into the darkened sky, each one filled with the relentless work of billions of men and women who spent their lives building weapons, ships, and machinery for the Imperium's endless wars. The air was thick with the smell of burning oil and the sharp tang of metal. Every street was crowded with people moving like ants, their faces blank and weary as they shuffled through their daily routines. There was no time for leisure, no time for rest, only the constant grind of work. Lan had grown up in the lowest depths of Hive Alpha, where the rich and powerful lived in their towering spires far above, hidden from the filth and grime of the lower levels. The workers like him toiled in the depths, in the dark heart of the Hive, where the light of the Emperor was but a distant memory. His parents had been workers too, both lost to the brutal, unforgiving machines of the manufactorums that churned out the Imperium's goods. His father, a man named Hal, had been crushed beneath a collapsing loading dock when Lan was just a boy. The accident had been swift, and his father had died instantly, his body torn to pieces by the heavy machinery. Lan's mother had been taken by the Hive's diseases, her lungs failing after years of inhaling the toxic air. She had died in a makeshift hospital, surrounded by other workers who had also succumbed to the relentless demands of the Hive. Lan had no memory of his childhood before their deaths. The Hive had consumed his family, his people, and his very identity. He had grown up in the orphanages of the lower Hive, surrounded by the same bleakness and despair that defined the world around him. He had learned early on that there was only one way to survive in the Hive: by working. It was a world where the strong survived and the weak perished, and as the years passed, Lan had become strong enough to endure the labor, strong enough to survive. He had been assigned to a manufactorum at the age of 14, like all children who came of age in the Hive. His job was to work the assembly lines, creating the weapons and tools that the Imperium demanded. His hands had become calloused and scarred from the endless hours of work, and his body had grown thick and muscular from the constant strain. The work was exhausting, but Lan had learned to shut out the pain, to focus solely on the task at hand. It was the only way to survive. Lan had never questioned his purpose in the Hive. He had never thought to ask why he spent his days building the weapons of war, or why he was born into this grim, unforgiving world. He had been taught from an early age that this was his duty, his place in the universe. The Emperor had chosen humanity to be his servants, and the Hive was where they served. There was no higher calling, no greater purpose than to toil in service of the Imperium. The Imperium had promised peace, had promised protection from the horrors of the galaxy, but Lan knew better. He knew that peace was an illusion, that the war would never end. He had seen it in the faces of the workers around him, in their hollow eyes and empty expressions. They had given up on any hope of a future beyond the Hive. They had given up on dreams, but that all began to change the day he found the note. It was a small, folded piece of paper, tucked carefully beneath his station on the assembly line. Lan had almost missed it, but something about the way it was hidden in the corner of his workspace caught his eye. It was unusual. Workers in the Hive didn't leave notes for each other. Theirs was a world of silence, of grim routine, where communication was brief and functional. So, the presence of this paper felt almost out of place. Lan's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the note, his curiosity piqued. The message written on it was simple but direct. There is more than this. The Hive is not your home. There is a way out. His heart raced as he read the words. At first, he couldn't make sense of them. What was this? A joke? A trap? A foolish fantasy from someone who dared to dream of escape, just as he had once done, years ago, before he had buried that hope deep inside him. The note felt heavy in his hands. There was a strange urgency to it, as if it was meant for him, and only him. He quickly glanced around the manufactorum, searching for the source of the note, but there was no one watching him. The workers around him were too absorbed in their tasks, their faces blank with exhaustion. But Lan couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching him, waiting for him to find the note. He slipped the paper into his pocket, unsure what to make of it, but the words echoed in his mind for the rest of the day. There is more than this, a way out. What did it mean? Could there really be an escape from the Hive, from this endless cycle of labor? The thought seemed impossible. The Imperium was vast, its reach stretching across the galaxy. The Hive was a part of that machine, an unimportant cog in the greater system. And yet, Lan felt something stir within him, a hope, a spark of rebellion. Could it be true? Could there really be a way out of this hellish existence? That night, as he trudged back to the dormitory where he lived with dozens of other workers, Lan's mind was consumed by the thought of the note. He barely slept, his body tossing and turning on the hard cot. The air in the dormitory was thick with the smell of sweat and metal, and the constant hum of the Hive above filled the air with an oppressive weight. The next morning, Lan made up his mind. He had to know more. He couldn't just dismiss this note as a pipe dream, a cruel joke. He had to find the person who had left it, to learn if there was truly a way to escape the Hive. As he made his way back to the manufactorum the following day, his thoughts raced. How would he find this mysterious person? How would he know who to trust in a world where everyone kept their heads down and their mouths shut? Lan's mind was consumed by these questions as he entered the factory. The noise of the machines greeted him, a relentless hum that filled the air. The workers around him were as tired as ever, their faces drawn and hollow, their bodies bent beneath the weight of their labor. But Lan could no longer see them the same way. He was different now, his mind alive with the possibilities that had been sparked by the note. For hours, he worked in silence, his hands moving mechanically as he assembled parts on the line. His thoughts were elsewhere, scanning the room, searching for the man who had written the note. And then, as if by fate, he saw him again. The man stood at the far end of the room, a figure cloaked in shadow, his face hidden beneath a hood. He was tall and gaunt, his movements slow and deliberate. Lan couldn't see his eyes, but he knew it was him, the one who had left the note. Without thinking, Lan stood up and began to walk toward him. The man noticed him instantly, his head turning slightly as Lan approached. There was no surprise in his face, no fear, just a quiet, knowing look. The man didn't say a word. Instead, he simply turned and began to walk deeper into the factory, disappearing into the maze of machines. Lan followed. Lan's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the shadowy figure through the maze of factory machines. His footsteps were soft, nearly drowned out by the deafening hum of the assembly lines. The worker's feet moved with purpose, his stride sure, as if he had walked these halls 1,000 times. Lan, however, felt every step he took like a betrayal of the life he had known. He was stepping into the unknown, a world beyond the boundaries of his own life, where the only certainty was risk. The man ahead of him never turned to look back. Instead, he led Lan deeper into the heart of the Hive, past the rows of machines that churned out weapons and supplies for the endless wars of the Imperium. The deeper they went, the darker the corridors became. The harsh industrial lights flickered above them, casting long shadows on the walls that seemed to close in on them like a vice. Lan's mind raced. Who was this man? Why had he left the note for him? Was this some kind of trap, a test to see if Lan could be trusted, or had he been chosen for something more? The questions consumed him, but there was no time to find answers. His instincts told him to keep following, to keep moving forward. Something told him this path was his only chance, his only opportunity to escape the soul-crushing grind of Hive life. They walked for what felt like hours, though Lan knew it could not have been more than 20 minutes. The deeper they went, the less industrial the area seemed. The whirring of machines grew quieter, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to envelop them. It was almost as if the very air had changed, as though the hive itself was holding its breath. Finally, the man stopped in front of a large, reinforced door. It was unlike any other door Lan had seen in the hive, sleek, smooth, and almost too pristine. The man placed his hand on a small panel beside it, and with a soft hiss, the door slid open. Without a word, he gestured for Lan to enter. Lan hesitated for just a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was it, the point of no return. He had already crossed so many lines in his mind, so many invisible boundaries, that to turn back now would be impossible. He stepped inside. The room beyond was dimly lit, but Lan's eyes quickly adjusted. It was a large, open space, filled with rows upon rows of data terminals and coitator banks, their blinking lights casting a cold, mechanical glow on everything. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something older, deeper, as though this place had been untouched for a long time. "Welcome to the vault," the man said, his voice low but not unfriendly. He turned to face Lan for the first time. His eyes were intense, a piercing blue that seemed to see straight through him. "You've made it this far. That's something. Not many have." Lan swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "What is this place? Who are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to one of the terminals and began typing, his fingers moving quickly over the ancient keys. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted data files. Lan could barely make sense of the symbols and letters, but he could feel the weight of the knowledge contained within them. Whatever this place was, it was not part of the hive. It was something else entirely, something forbidden. "You're not the first worker to find the note," the man finally said, his voice steady. "But you are one of the few who made it this far." Lan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What do you want with me?" The man turned to face him again, his expression unreadable. "I don't want anything from you, Lan. But you—" He paused, as though carefully considering his next words. "You have something in you that they're afraid of. That's why they keep you down there, in the depths. The workers are expendable, tools to be used and discarded, but you're different. You've seen something, haven't you? Something that doesn't fit with the world you've been told to accept." Lan felt a chill run down his spine. This man, this stranger, knew more about him than he had ever admitted to himself. He could feel the truth creeping up on him, threatening to expose the lies he had been fed all his life. "What are you talking about?" Lan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming. "You've seen the truth, Lan. The truth about the hive, about the Imperium, about the Space Marines." Lan recoiled, his breath catching in his throat. "What do you know about them?" The man smiled faintly. "I know that they are not the saviors you've been told they are. I know that they are part of a much larger plan, one that has trapped humanity in an endless cycle of war and death. The Emperor's vision for humanity was not one of eternal conflict. It was a vision of something greater. But that vision was buried long ago, and the hive is where the truth is hidden." Lan could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had grown up in a world that idolized the Space Marines, seeing them as the ultimate protectors of humanity. They were heroes, gods in the eyes of the common people, their power and courage unmatched. The idea that they were anything less than that seemed impossible, heretical even. But the man's words had a weight to them, a conviction that Lan couldn't ignore. "You're telling me," Lan began, trying to find his voice. "You're telling me the Emperor didn't create the Space Marines to protect humanity?" The man nodded slowly. "No. The Emperor created them to serve as the first step in his grand plan, the first step in humanity's evolution into something more, but that plan was corrupted. The Space Marines became something else entirely, something that could never bring peace to the galaxy." Lan felt a surge of anger. "So, what? You want me to betray the Imperium, to betray everything I've been taught?" The man's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "No, I want you to understand the truth. The Imperium is a lie, Lan. It is a machine that feeds on war, that sustains itself by keeping humanity in a perpetual state of conflict. And the Space Marines, the very beings you revere, are the instruments that keep it all in motion." Lan's mind was reeling. He had always known something was wrong. Something had always felt off in the Hive. But this was far worse than anything he had imagined. The thought of the Space Marines, the great heroes of the Imperium, being nothing more than instruments of destruction, it shattered everything he had believed. "Why are you telling me this?" Lan asked, his voice trembling. The man's gaze hardened. "Because you have a choice to see beyond the lies, a choice to help end the cycle of war. But you must understand this knowledge is dangerous. The Inquisition will stop at nothing to erase it, and if you continue on this path, there will be no turning back." Lan stood still, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had never been given a choice like this before. The world he had known, the life he had lived, had been a series of choices made for him by forces beyond his control. But now, he had been given the chance to choose his own fate, to choose between continuing the endless cycle of war or finding a way to break free. It was terrifying, overwhelming. But as he stood in the dim light of the vault, staring at the man before him, Lan knew that there was no turning back. The truth was out there, and he had already begun the journey to uncover it. And with that, Lan took his first step into a new reality. Lan's heart pounded as he walked away from the vault, the echoes of his footsteps mingling with the distant hum of the Hive's machinery. The dim light from the flickering bulbs overhead did little to comfort him. If anything, it made the shadows seem darker, stretching out from the corners of the corridors like the very thoughts that had begun to plague him. What had he just agreed to? The truth about the Space Marines, the Emperor, the Imperium, it was all too much. It contradicted everything he had been raised to believe. The stories, the heroes, the endless praise for the transhuman warriors, all of it now felt like a mask, hiding a terrible truth. Lan wanted to scream, to shake his head and deny it all. But something in him, something deep within his soul, knew that there was no turning back. He couldn't pretend that nothing had changed. As he walked through the dark, winding passages of the Hive, Lan's mind raced. His every step seemed to take him deeper into a world of lies, yet there was a part of him that felt strangely free. The heavy burden of unquestioning faith was beginning to lift, replaced by the weight of knowledge, a dangerous knowledge that he couldn't unlearn, no matter how much he wished to. He could feel the pressure building in his chest, the tightness that came from the conflict raging within him. The part of him that still clung to the faith of the Imperium, screamed in denial, while the other part, the part that had seen the truth, whispered of a path towards something different, a path that led beyond endless war, beyond the cycle of violence that had shaped his entire existence. The deeper he walked into the Hive, the more he felt the growing presence of something he couldn't quite define. The Hive was alive, suffocating, a machine with too many gears turning in too many directions. Its very walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a forgotten heartbeat, its inhabitants mere cogs in the machine. Lan had always been a part of that machine, his every action predetermined by the world around him. But now, for the first time in his life, he felt like he could hear the sound of his own pulse, the beat of a heart that didn't belong to the Hive, that didn't belong to the Emperor. And then he saw her. She was standing in the shadows, just outside the flickering light. A figure draped in a cloak that seemed to merge with the darkness, her face obscured by a hood. Lan froze, his heart skipping a beat as he instinctively reached for the pulse rifle at his side. But the woman's voice, low and clear, stopped him before he could make a move. "Don't be afraid, Lan," she said, her voice smooth, almost melodic. "I've been expecting you." Lan hesitated, unsure of how to react. Who was she? Another agent of the Imperium? Another inquisitor sent to silence him for what he had learned? But no, there was something in her voice, something familiar. She didn't speak like an agent of the Inquisition. There was no coldness, no harshness in her tone, just the soft, beckoning pull of something different. "What do you want from me?" Lan asked, his voice tight with suspicion. The woman stepped forward, her cloak swirling around her like liquid shadows. As she moved, the light caught her features, revealing a face that was both familiar and strange. Her eyes were the same piercing blue as the man in the vault, but her expression was softer, more serene. "I want to help you, Lan," she said, her eyes locking onto his. I know what you've seen, I know what you've learned, and I know the path you're walking now. Lan's stomach tightened. Who are you? How do you know me? The woman smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. I've been watching you for a long time. You've always been different. I can see it in your eyes, the doubt, the questions. You've always known there was something wrong with the world you live in, haven't you? Lan swallowed hard, his mouth dry. How did you know? I've barely spoken to anyone about it. She stepped closer, her voice a whisper. You don't need to speak for me to know. I see it in your actions, in the way you question the world around you. You're not the first worker to seek the truth, Lan. You won't be the last. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. He had never met her before, yet it felt as though she knew him better than anyone. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if all his deepest fears and desires were laid bare before her. What do you want from me? Lan repeated, his voice firmer this time. He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. I want to show you the truth, the woman replied. The truth about the Hive, about the Emperor, about the Space Marines. You've seen the beginning of it, but there's so much more waiting for you. The knowledge you've uncovered is dangerous, Lan. You've already learned what the Imperium has been hiding, but now it's time to understand why they've hidden it from you. Lan took a step back, his mind racing. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, suffocating him. I don't know if I can do this, Lan muttered, almost to himself. I don't know if I can live with this truth. The woman smiled, her eyes softening with a quiet understanding. You don't have to live with it alone, Lan. You're not the only one who has seen the truth. There are others, people who want the same thing you do, freedom from the lies, from the endless war. You don't have to be afraid. But if I choose this, Lan said, his voice wavering, I'll be a traitor. I'll be betraying everything I've ever known. You won't be betraying anything, the woman replied gently. You'll be freeing yourself. You'll be freeing humanity from the endless cycle of violence that has defined your world. You'll be part of something bigger, something that will change the future. Lan's mind spun. The words felt like a promise, an offer he couldn't refuse, yet he knew that accepting it would change everything. It would take him down a path from which there would be no return. Come with me, the woman urged, her voice gentle but insistent. Let me show you the way. Lan hesitated for just a moment longer. Then, with a deep breath, he made his decision. All right, he said, his voice steady now. I'll follow you, but only if you promise me one thing. The woman raised an eyebrow. And what is that? Promise me that I'll be able to make a difference, Lan said, his eyes blazing with newfound determination. Promise me that I won't just be another cog in the machine. Promise me that this isn't all for nothing. The woman nodded, her smile returning. I promise, Lan. I promise. And with that, Lan took the first step into a new reality. A reality where the lies of the Hive could no longer hold him back, where the chains of the Imperium no longer had power over him. He was free now, and there was no going back. Lan's decision to follow the mysterious woman, who now introduced herself as Arienne, marked the beginning of a journey that would irrevocably alter his fate. She led him through the labyrinthine corridors of the Hive, but with each turn, the air grew heavier, as if the very structure of the city was becoming more oppressive, more suffocating. The distant hum of the Hive's machinery, once a comforting backdrop, now sounded like the droning of a monstrous beast, its breath laboring with every passing moment. Arienne guided him through a series of locked passages, each one revealing a deeper, more secretive part of the Hive, places where even the workers seldom ventured. There were no grand hallways here, no towering spires or massive chambers, only small, claustrophobic rooms, each one filled with machines whose purpose Lan couldn't even begin to comprehend. These were the places where the true power of the Hive lay hidden, where the dark secrets of the Imperium were concealed beneath layers of lies and propaganda. As they walked, Lan's mind raced. He had made the choice to follow Arienne, but now that the decision had been made, doubt crept in like a shadow, filling the corners of his mind. What had he gotten himself into? Was this the right choice? Would he truly be able to change anything, or was he just stepping into another trap, one more layer of corruption in a universe that had been built on lies? But then he looked at Ariane. There was something about her, something that made him believe she was different from everyone he had ever known. Her eyes, though cold and calculating, held a fire, an unwavering conviction that Lan could not ignore. She wasn't afraid of the truth. No, she was actively seeking it, willing to unearth the darkest of secrets if it meant freeing humanity from its shackles. "You're wondering what this all means, aren't you?" Ariane's voice broke through his thoughts, and Lan blinked, realizing he had been staring at the floor, lost in his own mind. Lan nodded silently. Words failed him, as the weight of what lay ahead settled upon his chest. "Don't worry," Ariane continued, her tone warm but firm. "You're not alone in this. There are more of us, those who seek to uncover the truth, to expose the lies that have shackled humanity for so long. And once you see what I've seen, once you understand the truth of the Emperor's design, you will understand that this isn't just a battle for knowledge, this is a fight for the future of mankind." The words echoed in Lan's mind. The future of mankind. It was a noble goal, but one that had always seemed so far removed from his own life. He had never seen the Hive in that way before, not as a prison for humanity, but as a stage for something much larger, something more profound. The realization that he could play a part in shaping the future of mankind was both terrifying and exhilarating. Finally, they reached their destination, a massive, vault-like door set deep into the bowels of the Hive. Unlike the numerous administrative doors Lan had seen before, this one was ancient. Its surface was pitted and worn, and the mechanisms that controlled it looked as though they hadn't been touched in centuries. Ariane approached it with the ease of someone who had been here before. She placed a small, engraved device into a hidden recess beside the door, and with a soft hiss, it slid open. The room beyond was dimly lit, but Lan could make out the outlines of several figures, each of them engaged in some form of work. At the center of the room was a massive machine, its humming sound reverberating throughout the chamber. Lan's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was. "This is where it all began," Ariane said, her voice softer now. "This is where the Emperor's original vision was altered." Lan's gaze shifted from the machine to the figures in the room. They were all working diligently, but there was an unsettling quality to the way they moved. Their eyes were hollow, their faces blank, as if they were following orders without any true understanding of why. They were the workers of the Hive, but there was something wrong about them. "They are all under the influence of the machine," Ariane continued. "Each one of them has been stripped of their humanity, their memories, and their will. They are tools, much like the Space Marines, built to serve a purpose. But unlike the Space Marines, they were never meant to be heroes. They were meant to be forgotten." Lan's mind reeled as he took in the sight of the machine. It wasn't just a machine, it was a weapon designed to strip away the very essence of a person, to reduce them to nothing more than a cog in a vast, unfeeling system. It was the same thing the Emperor had done with the Space Marines, only this time, the consequences were far more sinister. "What is this?" Lan whispered, his voice trembling. "This," Ariane said, "is the key to everything. The machine here is a mind cleanser, a device that erases memories, suppresses emotions, and transforms the individual into something else, something hollow. The Space Marines may have been the Emperor's grand vision, but this is the true purpose of the Hive, to break the human spirit and rebuild it in a form that can never question the system again." Lan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had always known the Hive was a place of suffering, but he had never understood the full extent of its darkness until now. He had been a part of it, a cog in the machine, just like the workers around him. He had believed in the Emperor, in the system, in the lies that had been fed to him from birth. But now, standing in the heart of this terrible truth, Lan understood that everything had been a lie. The machine hummed louder, its presence overwhelming. Lan's legs felt weak beneath him, and he stumbled slightly. Ariane caught him by the arm, steadying him. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "This is just the beginning. We will expose the truth. We will show the people of the Hive what they've been forced to forget." Lan swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. He felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He couldn't back out now. He had seen too much. He had learned too much. "I'll help you," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was still racing. "I'll help you bring this truth to light." Ariane smiled, a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. "Good. But remember, Lan, the truth we seek is dangerous. The Inquisition won't let us expose it without a fight. We will be hunted, but if we succeed, if we can show the Imperium the truth of what's been done to them, we will change everything." Lan nodded, a sense of determination welling up within him. This was no longer just about his own survival. It was about something much greater. It was about humanity's future, about breaking the cycle of endless war and suffering. But as he looked at the workers around him, the empty-eyed faces of the men and women who had been broken by the system, he realized just how difficult that path would be. The battle ahead would not be won with simple weapons or brute strength. It would be a war of minds, a war of information, and Lan knew that the truth would be their greatest weapon and their greatest curse. Lan's decision to aid Ariane in uncovering the truth marked the point of no return. Every step taken deeper into the heart of the Hive now brought them closer to the abyss. But the more Lan learned, the more he realized how far-reaching the lies of the Imperium truly were. The Hive, once a place he had considered a mere cog in the vast machinery of the Emperor's will, was beginning to reveal itself as a far darker, more twisted entity than he could have imagined. The Mind Cleanser, which had first appeared as a tool of unimaginable power, now seemed to symbolize the very soul-crushing nature of the Hive. Lan began to understand that this was not just a technological marvel, but an instrument of oppression, designed to strip humanity of its very essence, its ability to question, to think freely. The workers in the depths of the Hive were no different from the Space Marines in one chilling sense. Both were stripped of their humanity, their minds twisted into something unrecognizable to serve the will of the Emperor. But while the Space Marines were a tool of conquest, these workers were tools of subjugation, tools for the perpetuation of an endless, eternal war. As they left the Mind Cleanser chamber, Lan's mind churned with the weight of what he had witnessed. The images of the workers' blank faces haunted him, and yet, in his gut, a stirring of something new began to take shape. A longing for something more than the endless cycle of pain and violence he had come to know. He had lived his life as a cog in the Hive, accepting the Emperor's design as inevitable. But now, his perspective was changing. He realized that there was more to life than just serving a higher power without question. Ariane's voice cut through his thoughts as they made their way back toward the hidden rooms in which they had spent the last few hours. "We have a long road ahead," she said, her words steady and calm. "The Inquisition will never let this go. They will hunt us every step of the way. But there are others who know what we know, others who will join us. The truth we uncover will be our shield." Lan's heart was racing. "And if they don't join us?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What then?" "If they don't," Ariane said softly, "then we'll have to fight alone." The reality of their situation began to weigh heavily on Lan. The mere act of seeking the truth had already set them on a path that would lead to their destruction. Yet despite the fear that gnawed at him, there was an undeniable thrill in the rebellion they had started, a rebellion that would not only expose the corruption at the heart of the Imperium, but would also open humanity's eyes to the possibility of something different. For so long, Lan had lived in the shadow of the Emperor, his faith unwavering in the face of adversity. He had accepted the endless wars, the never-ending struggle against chaos and the Xenos, as an inevitability. It was only now that he saw the cracks in that belief. The Emperor, the supposed savior of humanity, had built an empire that was as broken and corrupt as any other, and the Space Marines, once thought to be humanity's ultimate protectors, were nothing more than glorified instruments of war. They had been created to keep humanity in a constant state of violence, to ensure that peace would forever remain an illusion. Lan had been a part of that system. He had believed in it, had fought for it, and now he was a traitor to it. The rest of the journey through the hive was a blur, filled with fragmented thoughts and fleeting glimpses of the hive's inner workings. Every step Lan took brought him further into the shadows, where the light of truth seemed ever so distant, hidden behind layers of secrecy and lies. And yet, despite the overwhelming fear that clung to him, Lan couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something monumental. The truth, once it was uncovered, could shatter the very foundations of the Imperium. It could change everything, and with that thought, the weight of their mission settled into his chest. They were going to do this. They were going to expose the truth, no matter the cost. As they arrived at the hidden room where Ariane had first taken him, Lan looked around at the others who had gathered tech priests, former Imperial Guard officers, and even a few rebel workers. Each of them had seen the truth, and each of them had chosen to fight for it. They were the last bastion of resistance, standing against a tide of darkness that threatened to drown them all. Ariane turned to the group, her eyes cold but filled with purpose. "The Emperor's lies must be revealed," she said, her voice ringing out across the chamber. "We have the knowledge, and now we have the power to change the fate of humanity." Lan felt a surge of energy course through him, a wave of conviction that he had never felt before. This was more than just a fight for survival. This was a fight for the future of humanity. It was a fight for truth, for justice, for a world where peace wasn't just a fantasy, where humanity could exist without the perpetual cycle of war. But even as the weight of their cause settled over him, a part of Lan couldn't ignore the overwhelming odds they were facing. The Inquisition was powerful, perhaps too powerful. They had access to resources that no one could imagine, and their reach extended into every corner of the galaxy. Yet Lan had already made his choice. There was no turning back now. "We have to act," Ariane said, bringing him back to the present. "We cannot wait any longer. The information we've gathered will be enough to start the fire, but we need more. We need allies, and we need a way to get this knowledge out before the Inquisition can erase it all." Lan nodded. "Where do we go from here?" Ariane's lips curved into a thin smile. "We go to the heart of the hive, the deepest level. There, we'll find the final piece of the puzzle, the one that will prove everything we've discovered." Without another word, the group began to move, their silent footsteps echoing in the dim corridors of the hive. Lan could feel the tension rising, the weight of their mission pressing against his chest. This was it. There would be no turning back. If they succeeded, they would change the fate of humanity forever. But if they failed, the consequences would be dire. For them, for the truth, and for the entire Imperium. Lan's thoughts were a whirlwind as they navigated deeper into the hive. Every passageway, every turn, seemed more oppressive than the last. The thick air felt heavier now, as though the very walls of the hive were closing in on them. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the thick machinery and industrial hums around them, but Lan's mind was focused elsewhere. They were going further into the unknown, heading toward a place that had been deliberately hidden, a place where secrets that could shatter the Imperium lay in wait. Ariane led them confidently, her every step purposeful and measured. Despite the dangers that loomed, there was no doubt in her demeanor. She had known what she was getting into from the beginning, and it seemed now that she had anticipated every move, every obstacle, with eerie precision. But even Ariane couldn't hide the weariness in her eyes. The journey was taking its toll on all of them. Lan kept his gaze focused ahead, his mind racing with questions and concerns. Every part of him felt alive with anticipation, but that same part was gripped with dread. What was waiting for them in the depths, and would they survive what they were about to uncover? "We're close," Ariane said, breaking his train of thought. "Just a little further." Lan didn't respond. He simply nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He was ready, or at least he had to be. The weight of their mission felt heavier now, as if the very air in the hive was thickening with the realization of what they might uncover. The deeper they went, the more the hive transformed. The industrial machinery gave way to ancient, decaying tunnels that seemed untouched by the passage of time. It was as though the deeper levels of the hive were sealed off from the rest of the world, a forgotten relic, hidden in plain sight. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, glyphs, and pictographs that had long since lost their meaning, but to Lan, they felt almost like warnings. Signs of something ancient, something far beyond the reach of the Mechanicus or the Imperium. After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a vast, ominous chamber. The ceiling was so high that it seemed to vanish into shadow, and the room itself felt impossibly cold despite the constant heat of the Hive. The walls were lined with massive machines, their purpose unclear, and in the center of the room stood a single, imposing structure, an altar-like platform, surrounded by numerous mechanical appendages and control stations. "This is it," Ariane said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lan stepped forward cautiously, his eyes darting around the chamber. The air felt thick with some unspoken presence, something he couldn't put his finger on, yet it was palpable. It was as if the very space itself had been shaped to protect whatever was hidden here. "What is this place?" Lan asked, his voice low, reverberating in the stillness of the chamber. "This is the heart of the Hive," Ariane replied, her eyes scanning the room. "The place where the true nature of the Space Marines was concealed. What we've uncovered about the Emperor's plan, it all started here. This was where they perfected the first generation of Space Marines, and where they concealed the truth of their creation." Lan's stomach turned. "The truth?" Ariane nodded grimly. "The Emperor's vision was never to create eternal warriors. He designed them as a stopgap temporary soldiers for the Great Crusade. But what the Emperor could not have predicted was that the Horus Heresy would shatter that plan. The Space Marines, originally meant to be phased out after their mission, became the central force of the Imperium, and instead of transitioning humanity into something greater, they became tools of endless war." Lan shook his head in disbelief. He had spent his entire life believing the myths, the heroism, the sacrifice of the Space Marines. They were the Imperium's greatest champions, its saviors, the very foundation of humanity's defense against the threats of the galaxy. But now, he was hearing something completely different. "They weren't supposed to be," Lan trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "No," Ariane interrupted, her voice steady. "They weren't supposed to be the heart of the Imperium's military force. They were meant to evolve, to lead humanity into a new era. But after the heresy, they became the symbol of our stagnation. And worse yet, they became the instrument of our eternal war." Lan felt the ground shift beneath him as he processed this new reality. The Space Marines, the protectors of humanity, were no better than the very enemies they fought. Created for a single purpose, but twisted by the very forces that sought to control them. The Emperor's original vision had been destroyed, but it wasn't the heretics who had shattered it. It had been the Imperium itself. "But what happened to the plan?" Lan asked, his mind reeling. "Why did the Emperor never carry it out? Why are we still stuck in this endless cycle of war?" Ariane's gaze darkened, and she took a step forward. The Emperor knew that humanity would never be ready for peace, that the endless war was all that could keep us alive. The heresy proved that. But even before then, he had realized that the very nature of humanity, our need for conflict, our need to conquer, would prevent us from ever achieving true peace. The Space Marines were supposed to be the first step in transitioning to a higher existence, but humanity wasn't ready for that. The Imperium wasn't ready for that. Lan took a step back, feeling a deep sense of hopelessness settling over him. The Imperium, his entire life's work, everything he had ever believed was built on a lie. The Great Crusades, the endless battles, the martyrdom, it was all designed to keep humanity trapped in an eternal cycle of war. There would be no peace. There would be no future. Just endless violence, forever and ever. "But there's hope," Ariane said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was fierce, determined. "The knowledge we've uncovered, it's the key to ending this nightmare. We can expose the truth. We can show the people of the Imperium what the Emperor really wanted, what he truly envisioned for humanity." Lan's heart began to race again. The thought of revealing the truth, of shattering the lie that had held the Imperium together for so long, was a terrifying prospect. But it was also the only path forward. If they succeeded, They could free humanity from the endless war. They could finally bring about the peace that had been denied to them for so long. "What do we do now?" Lan asked, his voice shaky but filled with resolve. Ariane's eyes gleamed with purpose. "Now we reveal the truth. We expose everything. We show the Imperium what the Emperor's true vision was, what it still could be, if humanity chooses to embrace it." Lan felt a surge of emotion rise within him. The fire of rebellion, the desire for change, had ignited in him once again. It was no longer just a mission, it was a cause, a fight for the future of humanity. But even as they prepared to move forward, Lan knew one thing for certain: their journey had only just begun. The path ahead would be fraught with danger. The Inquisition would hunt them down, and the forces of the Imperium would do everything in their power to stop them. But Lan was no longer afraid. He had seen the truth, and now there was no turning back. Together, they would reveal the truth about the Space Marines, about the Emperor's vision, and about the future humanity could have if it chose to embrace peace. But as they made their way to the next phase of their journey, a chilling thought gnawed at Lan's mind. The truth might be more dangerous than they realized, and no matter how hard they fought, the Imperium would never let go of the lie without a fight. The thick industrial air of the Hive seemed to pulse with an oppressive weight. Every step Lan took felt like a burden, as if the very ground beneath his feet was pushing back, resisting the change he so desperately sought. The truth they had uncovered in the depths of the Hive was a fire that threatened to consume everything around them. It was a truth that no one was supposed to know, but now that it was out, there was no going back. Ariane led him through the dark, winding corridors, her movements confident despite the uncertainty that clouded the air. The plan was simple, but no less dangerous for it. They had to expose the truth about the Space Marines, about the Emperor's vision, and the horrific future that awaited humanity if the current cycle of endless war continued. Lan's thoughts raced as he followed. They were heading toward the Imperial Archives, the most secure and heavily guarded repository of knowledge in the Imperium. It was the only place where they could begin the next phase of their plan, gathering the evidence needed to prove their findings. But the archives were not just a place of knowledge, they were a fortress, a monument to the power of the Imperium, built to withstand anything except for the truth. The deeper they moved through the Hive, the more it felt like a journey into the very heart of darkness. The noise, the stink, the grime, they were all reminders of the hopelessness that pervaded the Hive. It was a system built on oppression and suffering, a world where people were born into their place in the machinery of the Imperium, where the promise of a better life was nothing but a fantasy. "Are you sure about this?" Lan asked quietly as they rounded another corner. His voice echoed against the cold metal walls, a stark contrast to the pounding of his heart in his chest. Ariane didn't hesitate. "We've come too far to turn back now. The truth has to be exposed. We can't let the Imperium continue this cycle of war, this lie that's destroyed us all." Lan nodded, his hand tightening around the weapon at his side. There was no going back, but he wasn't sure what lay ahead, or what they would have to sacrifice to uncover the full scope of the Emperor's intentions. What if the truth was too much to bear? What if it shattered everything the Imperium had built? What would become of the human race if they could no longer rely on the Emperor's supposed divinity? As they neared their destination, the air grew colder, the shadows more oppressive. The walls here were decorated with Imperial banners, and every surface seemed to glow with a faint, holy light. Lan had always been in awe of the archives, but now, as they approached the heart of the Hive's most protected area, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The archives were heavily guarded, with squads of Imperial soldiers stationed at every entrance. But Lan and Ariane were ready for this. They had studied the guards, learned their routines, and formulated a plan. With the right distraction, they would be able to slip past them undetected. But that would only be the beginning. Once inside, the true work would begin. As they approached the entrance to the archive, Lan turned to Ariane. "Do you think we can do this? I mean, really?" Ariane didn't answer immediately. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then she gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We don't have a choice. End." With that, they moved forward, slipping into the shadows and making their way toward the first of many obstacles that lay between them and the truth. Inside the Imperial Archives. The entrance to the Imperial Archives was a vast chamber, surrounded by towering pillars of stone and metal, etched with symbols that represented the Imperium's dominance over the galaxy. The room was bathed in an eerie light, casting long shadows across the floor, and at the center of the room stood the archives themselves, massive databanks, each one capable of holding millennia's worth of information. It was a structure designed to withstand not only the ravages of time, but the fury of the Imperium's enemies. Lan and Ariane moved quickly, staying in the darkened corners of the chamber as they neared their target. The guards, clad in power armor, patrolled in predictable patterns, and they knew exactly when to make their move. Lan's heart was racing, but he kept his breathing steady. This was it, the moment they would either succeed or be caught. As Ariane placed her hand on a control panel hidden in the shadows, Lan stood watch, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. The seconds ticked by like hours, each one adding to the weight of their mission. Finally, the door to the archive slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a massive chamber filled with rows upon rows of databanks, each one labeled with various codes and numbers. "This is it," Ariane whispered, stepping inside. "We need to find the records on the Primaris Marines. They're the key." Lan followed her in, his gaze scanning the rows of data files. He felt like a mouse in a labyrinth, each turn leading him deeper into a place he wasn't sure he wanted to be. The weight of the Imperium's secrets was suffocating, and as they moved deeper into the archives, Lan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just the guards, it was something else, something more insidious. "What are we really looking for?" Lan asked as they moved between the rows. "The Primaris protocols are important, but is there more to this?" Ariane hesitated for a moment, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "Yes, we're looking for the Emperor's original plan, his true intentions. If we can find it, we can show the galaxy what he really wanted for humanity, a future beyond the endless war, a chance for peace." Lan's mind raced. The more he heard, the more he realized how little he actually understood about the Emperor's vision. The Space Marines, the Crusades, everything he had known seemed to be built on shaky ground. But if they could expose the truth, it would change everything. It would tear the Imperium apart, but it could also give humanity a chance at something better. "Let's find it then," Lan said, his voice filled with resolve. They spent hours digging through the archives, combing through files and data logs, looking for any mention of the Emperor's original plan. But the deeper they searched, the more difficult it became to find anything that hadn't been redacted, erased, or classified. The Imperium had done everything in its power to bury the truth, but Ariane was undeterred. She knew what to look for, and slowly, piece by piece, they began to uncover the hidden records. The first breakthrough came when Ariane found a file labeled Primaris Protocols, Origin. The file contained a series of reports detailing the psychological and genetic modifications that had been made to the new generation of Space Marines. But it wasn't just the protocols, they also found a message from the Emperor himself detailing his vision for humanity's future. The Emperor's words were chilling. "We have built a civilization of endless war," the file read. "But this is not the path to humanity's salvation. The Space Marines are not meant to be eternal soldiers. They are meant to guide humanity beyond its current limitations, to help us evolve into something greater. But this cannot happen until we abandon the idea of eternal conflict. The future lies beyond the stars, but we must be prepared to leave our past behind." Lan read the file again, his heart pounding. The Emperor had known. He had known that humanity's endless war was a lie, a necessity born of a flawed design. And yet, the Imperium had never let go of that lie. The Space Marines, the Crusades, the sacrifice, it had all been a mask, hiding the true purpose of the Emperor's vision. As the truth began to sink in, Lan felt a deep sense of dread wash over him. What they were about to do would shatter everything: the Imperium, the Emperor, the Space Marines. But it was also their only chance to break the cycle of war, the only chance to build something better for humanity. Arienne turned to Lan, her face set in grim determination. "We have to show this to the galaxy. We can't let the Imperium continue its lies any longer." Lan nodded. "Agreed, but we're going to need help." Their journey had just begun. The cold silence of the archives settled around Lan and Arienne like a shroud as they pored over the documents, their minds reeling from the revelations they had just uncovered. The words from the Emperor, hidden away for millennia, burned in their memories. But it wasn't enough. Exposing the truth of the Emperor's plan and the true nature of the Space Marines was only the first step. Now they had to decide what to do with this knowledge, and how to ensure that it would not be buried again by those who would seek to protect the status quo. Lan couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. They were already on borrowed time, with the Inquisition's eyes upon them. It was only a matter of time before their presence in the archives would be noticed, and once the Inquisition became aware of their actions, there would be no escape. The truth, once spoken, would ignite a firestorm that would burn through the very heart of the Imperium. Lan looked over at Arienne, who was furiously typing into a quotator, her fingers flying across the keys. Her expression was focused, determined. He could see the strain in her face, the fatigue of their long hours in the archives, but she was not about to stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. "Arienne," Lan said softly, trying to catch her attention. "What happens after we expose this? What are we really doing here? We're not just exposing lies, we're setting fire to the foundations of everything the Imperium is built on." Arienne's hands paused over the keyboard for a moment, but she didn't look up. "We're doing what has to be done," she replied, her voice low but firm. The Emperor's plan was always more than what the Imperium became. He wanted peace, a future where humanity could rise above war. But the Imperium twisted that. The Space Marines, the endless wars, they're all part of the problem. If we expose the truth, maybe we can finally free humanity from this cycle. Lan swallowed hard, unsure whether he believed in the lofty ideals Arienne was now clinging to. It seemed impossible, but somewhere deep within him, a flicker of hope began to spark. What if she was right? What if there was a future beyond endless war? What if the Imperium's stranglehold on humanity had been a lie all along? He shook his head, trying to focus on the task at hand. There would be no peace for humanity unless they acted. The question was, how would they make their stand? What allies could they possibly hope to find in a galaxy so consumed by war and fear? "We need to get this information out of the archives," Lan said, his voice resolute. "We can't let it die here, hidden behind the walls of the Mechanicus. But the moment we leave, we'll be hunted. We have to prepare ourselves for the consequences." Arienne finally turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a look that was both sorrowful and steadfast. "I know, but we don't have a choice. The truth has to be heard, no matter the cost." Lan nodded. The cost had already been made clear to him. This mission wasn't about survival anymore, it was about something much larger. It was about freeing humanity from the chains of a false narrative, of a cycle that had kept them in endless conflict for millennia. "Let's finish what we started," Lan said, clenching his fists. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but it was the only road they had. The escape. The air in the archives felt heavy, like it was pressing against them as they hurriedly gathered the final bits of information. The data they had compiled was critical evidence that would expose the Emperor's true vision and the horrific truth of the Space Marines' creation. But the clock was ticking. Lan could feel it in the pit of his stomach. Every second that passed brought them closer to being caught. Outside the archives, the sounds of patrolling guards grew louder. The familiar hum of mechanized limbs and clanking boots reverberated through the walls. They couldn't afford to stay much longer. With every moment they spent in the archives, the risk of being discovered increased exponentially. "We're running out of time," Arienne said, her voice tight with urgency. "The data's ready. We need to transmit it, now." Lan glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. "How long until the transmission is complete?" 5 minutes at most," Arienne replied, her fingers flying over the coitator's interface. "I'm encrypting it, making sure no one can trace it back to us. Once it's done, it'll be scattered across a dozen different networks. Even if they catch us, they won't be able to stop it." Lan didn't respond, his mind elsewhere. He could hear the distant sounds of footsteps approaching. They had to move. They had to act fast. Suddenly, the door to the archive chamber slid open, and the sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway beyond. Lan's heart skipped a beat. The guards were getting closer. Ariane's fingers froze over the terminal, her face pale with fear. "It's not done yet," she whispered. "We're not finished." "We don't have a choice," Lan said, his voice low and steady. "We need to get out of here, now." Without waiting for a response, Lan grabbed Ariane by the arm and pulled her toward the exit. They moved as quickly and quietly as they could, but Lan knew it was only a matter of time before the guards found them. Every step they took seemed to echo in the silence of the archives. As they reached the hallway, Lan spotted a small maintenance door to the side, slightly ajar. Without hesitation, he pushed it open, and they slipped into the dark corridor beyond. The narrow passageway was cramped and full of exposed pipes, but it was their only chance. "We need to move faster," Lan urged, his voice urgent. "We don't have much time." Ariane nodded, her eyes wide with fear but filled with determination. She had no choice but to trust Lan now. They both knew that if they were caught, everything they had worked for would be destroyed. They moved quickly through the maintenance tunnel, their footsteps barely audible. It felt like an eternity before they finally reached a service elevator hidden in the back of the complex. Lan slammed his hand against the button to summon it, the metallic hum of the lift rising in the silence. The moment the doors opened, Lan shoved Ariane inside and followed her in. He hit the button for the lower levels, and the elevator began its descent. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the shrill sound of alarms. Red lights flashed above them, and a voice echoed over the loudspeaker. "Unauthorized personnel detected in the archives. All units, prepare for lockdown. The intruders must be apprehended." Lan's heart raced. He knew they didn't have much time left. "We've been compromised," Ariane said, her voice sharp. "They'll be on us in minutes." Lan nodded grimly. "We need to get out of the complex. Fast." As the elevator continued its descent, Lan's mind raced. They had the information now, they just needed to escape. But the question remained, would anyone believe the truth they were about to expose? Would the galaxy listen? And if not, what would happen to humanity, locked forever in a cycle of endless war? The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss, and Lan stepped out, his mind focused on the path ahead. There was no turning back now. The echoes of the alarm continued to reverberate in Lan's mind as they sprinted through the winding corridors beneath the Mechanicus complex. The distant sounds of clanking boots and mechanical hums grew louder, signaling that their time was running out. Every moment felt like an eternity as the threat of discovery loomed closer with each passing second. "Move faster," Lan urged Ariane, his voice urgent as he glanced over his shoulder. The sound of pursuit was unmistakable. The Inquisition's forces were already on their tail. Ariane's breathing was ragged, but she nodded in response. Her hands clutched the data slate tightly, as though it were the last remaining link to their future. The data they had transmitted was not just a key to unlock the lies of the Imperium, it was a weapon, and if they didn't get it out of the complex and into safe hands, it would be destroyed, lost to the tides of history forever. "We need a way out, now," Ariane exclaimed, her voice strained from both exhaustion and fear. Her mind raced, calculating their possible escape routes. There was only one exit left to them, the underground transit tubes that connected the Mechanicus complex to the outer industrial districts of Mars. But even that route was fraught with danger. "Down here," Lan shouted as he veered left into a narrow maintenance corridor. The walls were slick with years of grease and condensation, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. The narrow passageway offered little in the way of protection, but it was the only route that would take them to the service tubes. Behind them, the unmistakable sound of a bolter's chambering echoed down the hall, and Lan knew that it wouldn't be long before they encountered the full force of the Inquisition's wrath. He glanced over at Arienne, her face pale but resolute. She had been his partner in this madness from the very beginning, and he wasn't about to let her down now. If they were going to escape, they would need to stick together. They rounded a corner and came upon a sealed door leading into a darkened chamber just beyond the last corner before the transit tubes. It was an emergency airlock, the kind used to restrict access to vital areas of the complex. Lan slammed his fist into the activation panel, hoping it still worked. The door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing a darkened chamber beyond. A faint hum of energy filled the air, and Lan felt the weight of time closing in on them. He motioned for Arienne to follow him, and they stepped inside, the door sealing behind them with a soft but decisive click. "Get to the control panel," Lan ordered, his voice low. "We'll have to open the next level manually." Arienne wasted no time. She moved quickly toward the control panel, her fingers flying over the holographic interface as she activated the emergency protocols. The chamber flickered to life, bathed in the eerie green glow of the emergency lights. A small screen blinked, and the schematics of the transit system began to flash across the display. Lan kept his eyes on the door, his senses heightened to every subtle sound. The pursuit was closer now, and if they were caught here, there would be no escape. He could already hear the faint scrape of footsteps, muffled yet insistent, closing in from the other side of the chamber. They were running out of time. "I've got it," Arienne said, her voice a mixture of triumph and desperation. She punched in the final sequence, and the airlock's heavy doors slid open, revealing the service tube that would take them to the outer districts of Mars. They had no way of knowing if this path was still secure, but it was their best chance. Lan stepped forward, his gaze flicking once more toward the corridor behind them. The distant sound of bolter fire echoed through the metal halls, signaling that their time had finally run out. "Let's go," he urged. They both sprinted into the service tunnel, the walls seeming to close in as they moved further into the darkness. The sounds of the complex faded behind them, swallowed by the harsh hum of the ventilation system and the whine of distant machinery. For a moment, the world seemed to slow. Their breath came in ragged gasps as they moved deeper into the service tubes, their footsteps echoing against the slick metal floor. It was strange, almost surreal, that they were alive, that they had made it this far. But even as the passage stretched ahead of them, Lan knew they were not safe. They couldn't afford to relax, not yet. The tube twisted and turned, an endless metal snake burrowing beneath the surface of Mars. They passed several checkpoints, their passage signaled only by the dim lights that flickered overhead. As they moved deeper into the tube system, a strange feeling settled in the pit of Lan's stomach. It was as though they were being drawn further away from everything they knew. Suddenly, Arienne stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. She looked over at Lan, her face pale with dread. "What is it?" Lan asked, his voice tight with fear. I'm not sure," Arienne whispered. "I thought I heard something." Lan strained his ears, but all he could hear was the relentless hum of the servos and the sound of their own breathing. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, from somewhere behind them, came a sound that made Lan's blood run cold, a slow, deliberate clicking of footsteps. A deep, mechanical voice echoed down the corridor. "You cannot hide from the Inquisition." The clicking footsteps grew louder, closer, and with every passing moment, Lan could feel the oppressive weight of inevitability pressing against him. He glanced at Arienne, who was still frozen, her face locked in terror. Her grip on the data slate tightened until her knuckles went white. "We can't outrun them much longer," Lan muttered, his voice low but filled with urgency. He had always prided himself on being calm under pressure, but this felt different. The full realization of what they had uncovered began to weigh heavily on him. He wasn't just running from the Inquisition, he was running from the truth itself, a truth that could unravel the very fabric of the Imperium. "We have to keep moving," Lan said, taking her arm gently and urging her forward. But Arienne didn't move. She was staring at the far end of the tunnel, her expression unreadable. I can hear them," Arienne whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're coming." They know we're here. Lan didn't need to ask who they were. It was clear Inquisitor Callistro's voice had already become synonymous with the cold, unrelenting hunt that had now sealed their fate. "We can't fight them," Lan said, his mind racing. "Not here, not like this. We need to get the data slate to the secondary transmission node. It's our only chance." Ariane nodded, her face set in grim determination. The faint glimmer of hope she had once had was now replaced by something far colder: acceptance. "Stay close," Lan instructed. "Don't let them separate us." The sound of bolter fire rang out in the distance, signaling that the Inquisition's forces were closer than ever. A terrifying realization washed over Lan. They might already be too late. As they sprinted through the passageways, the narrow metal walls seemed to close in around them, threatening to suffocate them both. The old tunnels groaned underfoot, their age and neglect adding to the feeling of imminent collapse. Every corner they turned felt like a step closer to the abyss. The long-forgotten labyrinth of tunnels beneath Mars was their only chance now. There was a relay station at the farthest reaches of this abandoned part of the complex, buried deep in the bowels of the Hive world. If they could access it, they could broadcast the data to the Mechanicus for analysis, far beyond the Inquisition's reach. Lan checked the data slate once more, ensuring the critical information was intact. The Emperor's original intentions for the Space Marines, the brutal, horrifying truth that could destroy the Imperium's foundation, was now in their hands, but only if they survived to broadcast it. The sudden sound of rushing feet behind them snapped Lan back to reality. The shadows stretched along the walls as the pursuit closed in. "They're almost here," Lan said urgently. His mind was clear now, his survival instinct kicking in. They had no choice, they couldn't turn back. Just as they rounded the corner, Lan pushed open a hatch, revealing a maintenance access shaft leading downward. The sound of pursuit grew louder, and he motioned for Ariane to descend. "Go," Lan ordered, his hand resting on the open hatch. But just as Ariane was about to step down, there was a low growl, an ominous presence that chilled the very air around them. They were not alone. A silhouette stepped out from the shadows, blocking the entrance to the tunnel. Lan's heart sank as he recognized the imposing figure. It was the Inquisitor. Inquisitor Callistro stood in their path, flanked by two tech priests. His cold, augmented gaze locked on them, his mouth curling into a cruel smile. "You have nowhere to run," Callistro said softly, his voice carrying the weight of an unspoken finality. Lan's hand instinctively reached for the bolter holstered at his side, but he knew it would be futile. The Inquisitor was too close, his forces too numerous. "Give it to me," Callistro continued, his gaze flicking to the data slate. "The knowledge you've stolen, the truth you're trying to expose, it doesn't belong to you." For a brief moment, Lan felt a flicker of resistance. It was a lie, a complete lie. Everything he had uncovered was real. The Emperor had intended for the Space Marines to be a temporary solution tools of war that were never meant to endure beyond the Great Crusade. Humanity was doomed to suffer under the weight of their very existence. The truth was too important to be silenced, even by someone as powerful as Callistro. But as Lan's fingers tightened on the bolter's grip, a cold realization washed over him. Callistro was right. They had nowhere to run. The data slate was useless in their hands now, and their pursuit of truth had led them into a trap from which there was no escape. "Please," Lan said, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Don't you see? The Emperor made a mistake. The Space Marines were never meant to be eternal. They were designed to be a stepping stone for humanity, to evolve beyond warfare, to break free from this endless cycle." Callistro's lips tightened into a thin line. "You're wrong. The Emperor knew what he was doing, and so do we. Your vision of peace is a fantasy, Archivist, a weakness." Lan could feel the weight of the bolter pressing against his side. He raised it slowly, knowing that it wouldn't matter. But he couldn't give up, not yet. The sound of the tech priests moving forward sent a chill down his spine. But before anything could happen, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from further down the corridor. Reinforcements. It was their last chance. "Run!" Lan shouted at Ariane, pushing her toward the maintenance shaft. She hesitated, looking back at him, but she understood the urgency. She dove into the shaft as Callistro's voice rang out, "Do not let them escape." The chase had reached its final act. Lan and Ariane moved quickly through the narrow maintenance shaft, the dim glow of their helmets, the only light in the suffocating darkness. Behind them, Callistro and his forces were closing in, but they couldn't stop now. They had one final task ahead: broadcast the data and let the truth echo across the galaxy. Reaching the relay station, Ariane quickly set to work, interfacing with the ancient control panels. The sound of bolter fire echoed from behind them, but Lan held the line. He would fight, even if it meant his death, to ensure that the Emperor's truth would not be buried. With a final cry, Ariane activated the transmission. A signal burst through the air, shattering the silence and sending a wave of data through the galaxy. The truth had been sent. Lan closed his eyes as the first shots rang out behind him. He had done his duty. They had done their duty. As the darkness of the warp beckoned, Lan smiled. The truth had escaped. The galaxy would never be the same again.